Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, May 21st, 2021. D.C. wants us to be like the three monkeys: see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. In 2018, the top 1% of income earners earned more than $540,000 each. Collectively, this group earned 21% of all U.S. income and paid 40% of all federal income taxes. The top 10% of all taxpayers who earned more than $151,000 each earned 48% of the income and paid 71% of the federal income taxes. The Tax Foundation estimates that 58 million low and middle income taxpayers, now that's nearly 40% of all filers, will owe no income tax in 2021. In fact, Congress's Joint Committee on Taxation says that most taxpayers earning less than $75,000 will pay no income tax this year. Now, for many Americans, filing their income tax return is like going to the ATM. They not only get a refund of the money that was withheld from their paychecks, many receive additional cash back in the form of refundable tax credits, and they're happy to have it because the extra money allows them to provide more for their family. They really don't see themselves as leeching off of others. Instead, they believe that they're just simply taking what the system is giving them. Now, of course, the ruling class and their minions make sure that these people know who their benefactor is. They want lower-income Americans to believe that they're getting money because the ruling class is socking the rich with higher taxes and making them pay their fair share. They also want to perpetuate the notion that they're only making things fair when they confiscate wealth from the rich and redistribute it down to them. If anyone questions the system, they're told to be like the three monkeys. Don't ask questions and don't worry about where the money is coming from. Just be grateful to have it and leave it to the smart people who know about these things. Now, the ruling class doesn't want anyone questioning them because they know that the myth that the money is coming from taxes on the wealthy just won't stand up to any serious scrutiny. In large part, they're just printing more and more money, believing they'll never have to worry about paying it back. Now, doing it this way gives them a seemingly limitless supply of money to hand out without irritating the wealthy who have the resources to fight back against having their wealth confiscated. Now, basic economics says that printing more and more money coupled with a rapidly increasing national debt will inevitably lead to serious inflation. However, the past 30 years have seemingly defied this basic economic principle. Inflation has remained low in spite of massive increases in both the nation's money supply and the national debt. The D.C. smart people are banking on having this trend continue, but the hard truth is that it just can't continue indefinitely. Now let's look at inflation. Investopedia defines inflation as follows. Inflation is the decline of purchasing power of a given currency over time. A quantitative estimate of the rate at which the decline in purchasing power occurs can be reflected in the increase of an average price level of a basket of selected goods and services in an economy over some period of time. The rise in the general level of prices, often expressed as a percentage, means that a unit of currency effectively buys less than it did in prior periods. Now, in simple terms, let's say that $100 today buys 50 tomatoes. Next month, that same $100 buys just 49 tomatoes, and the following month, it's down to just 48 tomatoes. It's the same $100, but as the price of tomatoes rises, the same amount of money buys fewer and fewer tomatoes, and it's the same with every product and service throughout the entire economy. A blog written by Jeff Sparshott for the Wall Street Journal points out that inflation is happening now. In recent months, inflationary pressures have caused the cost of living to rise faster than paychecks. After adjusting for inflation, wages of production workers and non-managers fell 3.3% in April from a year earlier. That's the largest such decline since an inflation shock and recession in the 1980s. A fall in inflation-adjusted wages hits low and moderate-income households especially hard because they dedicate a larger share of their paychecks to covering daily living costs. The numbers might be temporarily skewed, But if inflation persists and is fueled by the Fed or the Biden administration's policies, it could raise questions about the costs and benefits of those policies for working Americans. Now, Larry Summers was Treasury Secretary under President Bill Clinton. He started warning about inflation in February, saying he's more concerned now than he was several months ago. He added that, quoting here, "Data are pointing more towards higher inflation than I expected and sooner," end of quote. So, what does this mean for lower-income Americans who are currently benefiting from the tax system? Well, not only will these people see their everyday purchasing power eroded significantly, they can expect to pay more for any loans they take out as well. Lenders tie the interest rates they charge on loans to inflation. If the interest rate on an auto loan, for example, was calculated assuming a 2% inflation rate, and then the inflation rate rises to 4%, the loan interest rate will have to increase by at least 2% in order to maintain the same level of return for the lender. The same inflation impact will rapidly increase the interest rates on home loans. The bottom line is that inflation will make our money worth a lot less in terms of how much it will buy. Now, this is particularly harmful to seniors who are retired and living on a fixed income. Now, they may see inflation drive the value of their homes up, but they'll also see it start to erode the value of their savings. If a senior thought their retirement was secure based on a 2% inflation rate, as has been the norm for the past 30 years, then they may have to reevaluate their situation if the inflation rate goes to 4% or higher. Now let's look at the effect of inflation on prices. At an inflation rate of 2%, it would take 36 years for prices to double. Double the inflation rate to 4%, and prices double in half the time, 18 years. But with an inflation rate of 10%, it would take just 7.2 years for prices to double. As you can see, high inflation is a serious problem. Now let's look at the FAIRtax solution. The FAIRtax is a better way for the U.S. government to collect revenue. It will greatly improve the economy and bring in increasing amounts of revenue for the government. The FAIRtax will not stop Congress from spending money it doesn't have. However, it will make it much harder for them to continue spending more money than they take in. Any of us can look at one number, the amount of FAIRtax collected, and compare that with the amount of the federal budget and see what's happening. In that case, the popular mantra in D.C. that the wealthy are just not paying their fair share just doesn't hold up. Now, all of us will be paying as we spend. In fact, with the FAIRtax, many of the wealthy will end up paying much more than they're currently paying in income tax. That's because there are no loopholes, no deductions, and no exemptions in the FAIRtax. The FAIRtax taxes what you spend, and it's just a fact that wealthy people spend more than those who don't have as much wealth. With the FAIRtax, Congress will be incentivized not to play one group against the other, but to help all of us prosper more. The more we prosper, the more we spend, and the more we spend, the more the government gets in revenue. Now, of course, some of the smart people in D.C. don't want us to prosper. They want to maintain control over people's lives by keeping them dependent on government for the things they need. In conclusion, many of us remember the children's game of musical chairs. A group of children march around a group of chairs while music plays. When the music stops, each child has to scramble for a chair and sit down. The only problem is there's always one less chair than there are children, and the child left standing is out of the game. If inflation continues, and basic economic theory says that it will, then people will start to realize that the music is about to stop, and they're going to have to scramble to maintain their financial security. People are already noticing that their money doesn't go as far as it once did, and they'll eventually figure out that it was the smart people in D.C. and their excessive borrowing that caused the problem, not the wealthier corporations being greedy. People receiving the benefits generated by printing money will demand that the smart people in D.C. provide them with more benefits to replace the purchasing power lost to inflation. This will be like a cat chasing its tail. It will not end well. It's a vicious circle. Printing money fuels inflation. As inflation rises, purchasing power is lost. As purchasing power is lost, there's a greater demand to print more money, which fuels more inflation, and it gets worse with every trip around the chairs. The world will eventually take note of the real condition of the U.S. economy, and interest on our massive debt will begin to spiral upward. As George Bernard Shaw once said, a government which robs Peter to pay Paul can always count on having Paul's support. Knowing this, the smart people will be scrambling to find another way of providing additional cash to people. They know they can't break the cycle of inflation by simply stopping the payments. That would make a lot of people really mad, and they'd likely take their anger out on the party in power. The fair tax will save the smart people from themselves because it will provide an increasing amount of money without the need to print any more. Instead of seeing the value of our assets ravaged by runaway inflation, the fair tax will restore economic stability, allowing our assets to retain their value. It's time that Americans take control of our country by eliminating the income payroll tax system. No more games that profit only the ruling class and their minions, the politicians. Enact the fair tax now. If you have friends who don't know about the fair tax, send them to FAIRtax.org. Have them watch the whiteboards under how it works, and if they agree, ask them to please join us. Then, contact your members of Congress and the President and demand that Congress pass the fair tax, the only truly fair tax.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.